Welcome to your weekday cup of the word. We're in 2 Corinthians chapter 12. Now, chapter 12 has three sections to it, so let's try and break it down into those three groups so we can better understand the chapter. Verse 1 through 6 will continue with Paul boasting, and he'll switch into the third person in this section of boasting. He won't say, I, Paul. He'll say, I know a man. And when he says, I know a man, what he's talking about is, yeah, that was me. And he'll talk about how there was a time when he went and he had a vision to the third heaven. Now, the first heaven is the sky where the birds fly. The second heaven is space where the stars and the sun are. And the third heaven, well, that's where God dwells. That's what we think of as heaven. And Paul says, I saw it. And he'll talk about how he had actually envisioned and seen paradise. Now, I cannot imagine how that affected Paul and his preaching. And when you put the pieces together, it sounds like Paul had that vision back after he had been converted in Damascus and he went to Arabia back in about Acts chapter 9. And so Paul, from the very beginning of his preaching, had this vision of heaven in his mind of that's where I want to go and that's where I want everybody else to go too. Now then, verse 7 through 10, he'll talk about a thorn in the flesh that he had. When you combine that with what Galatians teaches on the subject, it looks like whatever sickness he had, it was one that made him less than pleasing to look at. Many people think it was an eye problem because Paul would often say, look at what large letters I write with, because they figure if it was an eye problem, he had to write with large script. But that's just a guess. All we know is there was some sort of illness Paul had, and it was an illness that you could physically see and made him the kind of person that many people were not interested in being around at all. And Paul prayed about it, and he asked it to be removed, but he eventually learned that he was perfected in weakness, that when he trusted in God and worried about those sorts of things, that it all turned out better. And then the last part of the chapter, from verse 11 on, Paul's going to talk about his fear for the Corinthians. As he's wrapping this book up, he's going to spend a lot of time in this chapter saying his greatest fear is that he'll show up one day as he makes his journey through Macedonia and eventually heads south down there to Corinth, that he'll show up and there'll be a mess, and that all of his preaching will have been in vain, and there will be jealousies and strife. The funny thing is, as Paul is dealing with these people who are saying, Paul's a fake apostle, and he's dealing with this minority that's trying to destroy the Corinthian church, Paul's not just trying to win the battle with them. He honestly begs and appeals with them to not just have the majority obey God, but he says, you minority that don't like me, you turn back to God too. Get rid of the strife, get rid of the jealousies, and be whole in Christ, that his preaching won't have been in vain, and that when he shows up, they can rejoice together in Christ. Paul's goal from day one is to save everybody. And really, when you think about all the nasty things that were said about Paul by these false teachers, it's really impressive that here was a guy who had the kind of humility and grace in his heart to say, look, even if you hate me, I don't hate you. All I really want is for all of us to come under one God, one Lord Christ, and obey Him. Let's rejoice in Him. Throw away the jealousies, throw away the fights and the strife and the troubles, and turn back as one united group to Christ. That's 2 Corinthians chapter 12. That's your daily cup. And we'll see you tomorrow to finish off the book.